We should be going live. And I will try to spotlight us all, pin us all. Let's all get in here. We'll see what people can see on YouTube. Hello, everybody. Yep, we should be live. I think we're going through now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll just give a minute for everybody to load in. I can see in the comments a wild Gareth. Yes, you don't get to see me too often, so take it as a treat. Really, for today, as you all know, and could see from the title of our stream, this is in conjunction with Thrillerfest 2023. I'm actually here with Kevin. He's in the background here. You probably can't see him on screen, but Kevin from AutoCrit is here, plus Jeff from Thrillerfest. We'll probably hear a word from Jeff a bit later as well. And of course, our two wonderful guests for the day on screen, JD Barker and RL Stine. Now, I'm sure both you guys need no introduction, but JD is a New York Times bestselling author of various suspense thrillers like Dracul, The Fourth Monkey, and A Caller's Game. And of course, R.L. Stine is the best-selling author behind the legendary Goosebumps series, and I believe credited with creating the teen horror genre with Fear Street, with like over 80 million copies sold of all those books. So phenomenal, which is to say, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute honor to have you, and I think we'll have a lot of fun here. So welcome.
A pleasure. Pleasure. Are we done or what?
And that's it. We'll see you all later.
Oh, wait, what?
So first of all, I'll give a quick thank you to Jeff and the Thrillerfest team in the background for making this happen. AutoCrit is an official sponsor of Thrillerfest 2023. And just a quick shout out, if you are going to be attending the conference this year, both Kevin and myself will be there. So we'd love to see you drop on by, and you can take a personal demo of everything AutoCrit has. We also do have a fantastic sponsorship offer, which is lifetime membership, including everything, plus a ticket to an upcoming workshop. Check out autocrit.com/thrillerfest, link for that one. I think Kevin or Daniel will drop the link into the chat. But that said, let's begin the grilling, JD and Bob. I think we all know that a lot of the magic of writing happens in the edit. When we talk about editing, it's really about refining the writing, fixing your flow, making things clearer or more enjoyable to read. And it all boils down to that, isn't there, that famous Ernest Hemingway quote, "The only kind of writing is rewriting." So we want to hear today about your perspectives on all of that. And I'll just kind of bounce back and forth between the two of you, but feel free to interject if there's anything you want to say at any point.
Gareth, I should start out by telling you that I've been married to my editor. She actually gets paid to be my editor, and I will tell you that it's a nightmare.
So a lot of work.
How would you like to be married to your editor? It's unbelievable. That's about the only thing we fight about. Plots.
We don't want to say that too loud. My wife is my very first reader, and she doesn't charge me. So we don't want to.
Jane gets paid.
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah. She's missing a trick there.
Jane edited all the Fear Street books.
Wow.
And she's a very tough editor. Very tough. And I would say, Jane, the next one will make sense.
Well,
I never got away with that.
That's the trick, right? Was she tough on the very first one? Or did she give you just an attaboy and a pat on the back and hand it back to you?
There are no pats on the back. No, she was tough. I mean, it's a good thing. She was a tough editor. But, once I handed in a book once, and it came back, the manuscript came back with 2 words on the front, and that's all. It said, "psychotic ramblings." That was it.
Perfect editorial letter.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's like, yeah, it's super helpful when it just says "do better." It's like, no, okay.
Well, here's the best. I'll start out with the best advice I ever got from an editor. This was an editor at Random House, and I was doing an Indiana Jones book, and it took place in the Himalayas. And I used a Tintin comic for research, because that guy really researched everything, just to get the look of the Himalayas. And I never do any research. I hate research. I always make up everything, but I had to, do the Himalayas. And I handed in this book, and she handed it back again with 2 words, but it was the best advice I ever got. She wrote, more lore. But that's perfect, right?
Mhm.
More depth, more stories, more atmosphere, more background, more anecdotes, more lore.
It's better than more research.
Yeah. Right.
Perfect.
I thought that was amazing advice.
And I would say, jumping onto the line editing side of things, with how much you actually do in your process, JD, we can hit you first with this one. How are you when it comes to editing? I think we can talk more about your actual step-by-step process in a minute, but do you tend to leave self edits, kind of tidying things up in the line editing level, if we're talking copy edits, until you've actually completed your first draft if you're working on a novel? Or are you someone that edits as you write? You tend to stop and take some time with each chunk?
I've been doing this for a very long time. So I worked as a ghostwriter and a book doctor for almost 20 years before I started putting out my own titles. So I basically created a production line for myself. I've gotten to know Dean Koontz pretty well, and I always pick the brains of people that are way better at this than me to try and figure out what they're doing. And he tends to start his day by reading what he wrote the previous day and cleaning it up. And then when he gets to the end of that, then he keeps going with his story. And I started doing that, I guess, about 5 or 6 books ago. And for me, it works perfectly because it gets me back into the story, gives me a chance to clean up whatever I did the previous day. And then by the time I get to that last sentence of whatever I had on paper, my brain is already cooking, and I keep rolling with it. So that's more or less my daily process. The nice thing about that is there's very little that has to be done at the back end. Every time I write a book, the process gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And if you're editing as you go, you get to that last page, and a lot of times, there's not a whole lot you have to do, with the initial part of the novel, versus
Sure.
like the first one I wrote, which was, pages all over the office and moving stuff around and cut and paste and complete mess. You learn to streamline after a while.
I have seen some recommendations as well of when you're finished writing for the day, some people say finish mid-sentence, so you don't actually have to pick up from the end. Do you do that kind of thing as well?
I absolutely do. And because when I was doing this initially, I had a day job, so you have to squeeze out, at least 300 words a day to, get a page a day, knock out a novel in a year. So I turned myself into like a Pavlov's dog type scenario. I listened to a thunderstorm soundtrack on headphones as white noise. So the second I hear that, my brain kind of snaps into writer mode. And I never get up from the desk unless, I basically do the mid-sentence thing that you're talking about. Like I know exactly what's coming next. And the reason for that is I've talked to a lot of writers over the years where they'll sit down and they'll pound out 5,000-6,000 words, some incredible writing, session. But then it's like squeezing water out of a rock. They've got nothing left and they're exhausted, and they sit down the next day to try and write, and there's just nothing there. But if you get up, already knowing what's going to continue, where the story is going, your brain keeps working it. So while you're in the shower, you're walking the dog, you're eating dinner, you're continuing that story in your head, and you sit back down and just keep going.
I do the same thing. I have, I was writing 2,000 words a day, every day, 2,000 words. And when I hit 2,000, I quit.
Yep.
Sort of a game. Just wherever it is, I hit 2,000, the computer says 2,000, I get up and I go. I walk the dog.
I think I was at 2001 today. 2000 is my magic number too.
Sort of factory work.
Yeah, well, it's
piecework.
Because I'm sure you could do more, but I bet you if you do 3,000, you do 4,000, and the next day you go back and look at it, and there's only 2,000 good ones there. So you're right back to where
yeah, right. Yeah, I couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah,
I couldn't. Back in the day, I did a Goosebumps book every month. I did 12 a year.
Wow.
I don't know how I did that. I honestly don't know. I couldn't do that for anything now.
It makes me tired just thinking.
What?
How were they back then, Bob? Whenever you were kind of pumping them out like that, did they have to do a lot of cleanup at the end, or have you always done fairly clean drafts?
So I do just what he does. I go back over yesterday's, I do some editing on it, and then keep going till I hit 2,000. I do exactly the same thing, and it works fine. But I always do 2 drafts. I never hand in the very first thing I've done. I always do it. I go through it entirely and do a second draft, and I always hand in the second draft, always.
Superb. Well, I think that's a strong recommendation of process from both of you for that then. Now, one thing we want to do today, I actually have a manuscript here that we sourced from within the community. Now, I briefly mentioned it. I think both of you would prefer that it was a bit of a surprise. So it's entirely anonymous, and we can tell we have confirmed it's a first draft too. So we're really working with some raw materials here. And I'll share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see it, where we have the manuscript loaded into the writer's desk here. This will take me just a minute to find the right one, if it shows up. Where are you? It's always when you're live that things go wrong. Here we are. This should be the one. And I can zoom this in because I know we'll look at a few passages here and just think of what would go through your mind as one of you guys when you're looking at this kind of thing. How does it work? And for everybody watching as well on YouTube, if you're unfamiliar with AutoCrit, this is actually the platform itself. This is the inside of the writer's desk that you can see. Like JD, I know that you actually use AutoCrit for your personal editing, but I know you've said to me that you only use a kind of a fraction of what would be the complete powers of it. Let's just say that. But let's say you're working with one of your drafts here. What are the first things that you like to dig into, to start cleaning?
Yeah, so I don't want to downplay it. I mean, there's a lot of drafting involved, at least from my end, before anybody actually sees it. So typically, when I come up with an idea for a book, I'll write the first chapter. I show that to my wife, and she tells me whether or not it's good enough to pursue, or if I should just chuck it in the garbage. Once I get that green light, I basically close my door. Nobody sees anything until I knock out my first draft of the book. Once I get that first draft done, then I take it and I plug it into AutoCrit. And one of the reasons for this is I have zero formal training in writing. I don't have an MFA. I've taken creative writing in high school and college. I've got 2.5 degrees, but none of them are in writing. So the experience that I have, I've learned this through reading, like story structure and pacing and those types of things. It just comes to me. It came just from absorbing it through all the books that I've read over the years. But that means that I lack a lot of the simple stuff like, comma, you're trying to ask me where a semicolon is supposed to go. And I'm going to probably be wrong. So where AutoCrit came into play for me is I would write that very first draft and I would take it and I would drop it into AutoCrit. The section that I tend to focus on is called strong writing, I believe, in there. And then I just go through the tabs, just like what you have up at the top there. If we were in the strong writing section, you'd see what I'm talking about. And it basically helps with past and present tense, passive voice, showing versus telling, basically the problems that a lot of early writers have. And it red flags them for you and allows you to fix them. And what I noticed is over the years in doing that process, I trained my brain to no longer do it. So where I used to drop in a first draft into AutoCrit and I would have tons of red lines, if I do it now, there's like 1 or 2, there's not a whole lot there because the program basically teaches you just as, how to fix these things. So I recommend it to everybody, especially when I pick up a first draft from somebody and I, immediately see a paragraph filled with passive voice or, those rookie mistakes.
So you tend to find mostly in this area, well, I guess stuff like adverbs and things like that are going to be just second nature, not to dump a load of those in anymore. Is that the same kind of stuff? How did it work for you, Bob, as well? I did want to speak about bad habits.
You do learn as you write. He's right. I mean, you don't just keep making the same mistakes and same repetitious words and the same weak verbs and the same adverbs. You don't just keep doing it. The more you write, the better you get at it, I think.
Cool. I was thinking we can see here from I've had a brief look at this document as well, but JD, like you're mentioning with the grammar things, some of the rules, not everybody is completely au fait with them, and we can find here as well, running Grammarly on the document itself. We can see some little bits and bobs which definitely show this as a first draft. There's a couple of punctuation errors, I think a sort of homophone here and there, but that's really just the very basic first thing that you would ever do. I guess checking a lot of things is just going to be a general grammar check to make sure you're writing it right. But in terms of experiential things, let's head up to the opening here of this. I'm not sure if you guys can see the example that we have here, but obviously when we're talking about thrillers and writing a great thriller book, you want to have a nice slam bang opening, something really captivating from the start. And this one seems to be kind of right in the middle of I know it's a prologue, and I can ask about that. Your opinion on prologues would be good to hear. But what do we think about this opening kind of starting in the middle of a gruesome discovery is what it seems to be.
I mean, it's better than some of the other ones that I see. A lot of times when I did book doctor work, I would cut the very first chapter of the book or the first paragraph. A lot of times when authors write something, they tend to overcomplete. And I find that if I take the beginning of their chapter out and I take the end of their chapter out, a lot of times it creates a scenario where they're going to be forced to turn the pages really at the end of a chapter, because they tend to summarize everything, try to close it out and basically create a moment where they wrapped up everything. And, that makes sense on a certain level, but if you want people to keep turning the pages, it's the opposite of what you want to do. You want to leave that chapter on a cliffhanger. You want to force them to turn that page to figure out what comes next. Where AutoCrit is really a benefit, and I think a lot of people are starting to see this sort of thing. If you go back years and years, editors had the ability to take on a project. If a book landed on their desk and it was a solid story idea, something that they really resonated with them, but the book needed a ton of work, they could still take it on and they could handhold that author and they could get it to the finish line. In today's world, editors have books stacked up on their desk. They've got zero time for anything like that. So like the stuff that AutoCrit flags is typically what an editor would have flagged years back, but it's basically flagged in for you. So what I've seen is that if you run your story through something like this and you clean all of these different things up, by the time this book lands on an editor's desk, they're getting a very clean copy. You're basically handing them something that needs very little work. And in this country, how many people want work? If you give them something that they think is almost finished, that's not going to need a lot of polishing, they're more likely to pick it up and buy it, and they're more likely to pay you more for it than that project book.
Sure.
So that's the benefit that I see to this sort of thing.
It's like, can we get this straight to market?
You don't see these particular problems until you put it in a program like AutoCrit and realize, oh yeah, I am using a lot of the same words over and over again, or filler words like the word just. Like how many times is just in one chapter? It doesn't necessarily need to be there.
And Bob, how about you? What do you think of our opening here?
Well, it's a good gruesome opening. It's okay. Starting, with the third paragraph, it's good, nice and gruesome.
Sure.
Good way to open a book. Now, are you recommending AutoCrit like for beginning writers, that kind of thing? Writers who don't have an editor. Tell them a little different, JD. In children's books, the editors still edit.
Oh,
adult editors don't edit, but children's editors still edit. They'll do all this stuff you're talking about.
Yeah, you can still find the occasional adult editor that will go through this, but if they've got 10 submissions on their desk and one of them doesn't need any of that anymore, all of a sudden that one goes to the top of the pile. There's so much competition these days. I think anything you can do to give yourself a leg up as a new author, you should try it. And this is definitely one of those things. It would be terrible, and I see this happen a lot. An author's got a great story, but their execution is poor. The process, the manuscript that they turn into that editor just isn't done. It's half baked. And you only get one shot at that. An editor is not going to turn around and look at the same book 2 years later. You want to turn in that best possible product. So this helps new authors basically get there.
So you're recommending this mainly for new writers, right?
Yeah, like I said. Yeah, once you one of two things happen in this industry. Either you get a publishing deal and then your editor starts to work through these problems with you, and then you learn to work them out of your own writing because your editor is calling and yelling at you every time you do something. Either that happens, or a program like AutoCrit teaches you how to avoid those problems. It makes you become a better writer. And for a lot of people, like they need that little extra push to get their writing to the level of where an editor will actually take it on. So yeah, this is definitely more towards the beginning authors. Like I said, with my own stuff at this point, I'll still throw it in there because I do make mistakes, but there's so few and far between where I used to have to spend, maybe a week going through edits. Now it's maybe an hour or two of AutoCrit edits. There's just nothing.
Good. So you can learn a lot pretty quickly from it.
Absolutely. It catches absolutely everything, and it teaches you. It basically teaches you what you did wrong, shows you how to get it right. And when you get slapped in the head enough times, you stop doing it.
I could demonstrate a little thing that did pop out to me about this opening as well. Well, I thought, yeah, nice and kind of gruesome if you're looking for a captivatingly gruesome opening. The a little bit felt a little busy in terms of the pacing. You can see here our first opening paragraph. You know that it is clearly a little overuse of M dashes there, I think, as well, and especially our second sentence feels especially long to me. Seems to drag it down a little. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, this can help you find as well. Although comparing to what we would expect to see in the kind of thriller genre, we're actually not too bad at all for this excerpt. It's only about 10 chapters from the book, but it helps you notice just little things like that. There's a bigger section further on that we might need to. So this might be something I think that this author could look into is elongated sentences, things getting a bit too complicated at times, but very handy for that kind of thing. And sort of going back to this idea of bad habits or learning out of bad habits, is there anything in particular you could pinpoint, I think JD and Bob, from your early stages of your career that you've eventually, you know, worked out of your writing, something that just kind of jumped out at you?
For me, the word "just" was, you know, it was a problem for a long time. I used it a lot in the writing, and the funny thing is, you can go through with a red line and you can take it out, and it just doesn't need to be there. You know, so on here, that's the filler word section. And that's one of the things that I've caught. You know, had obviously writing in passive voice or past tense, that could be an issue. Those are the types of things that I've worked about with AutoCrit or with physical editors. I no longer do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too. I would almost never use the word had with the verb, especially writing for kids, because everything should be action. It shouldn't be had, it had, you know, in the past. For me, it's my working on weak verbs. You never want to use the word was as a verb.
Mm-hmm.
And you never want to use got or put, you know, ugly words, short words like that are just, they're always better verbs. I've had some copy editors who had some very interesting quirks, and so I don't know if they were right or not. One copywriter for a reader for Fear Street would never allow me to use the word look. She would circle the word look. Said there's always a better word than look. And I couldn't use look. She was also a fanatic about which way a door opened. Whether it opened to you, a classroom door, did it open out or open in? And I had to have many, many long discussions about how the door opened.
It's all about fire safety when it comes to a door.
Yes. Right.
You know,
she was also a weather fanatic. Somehow my weather was always wrong. It wouldn't be that windy in October. I get that a lot.
Well, you know, the thing is, though, those are the things that make the story feel real, though, when you get those right. I mean, one of the things that I tend to do in my draft is I timestamp each of my chapters and I date stamp them so that I know that this particular scene took place on September 15th, 2020 in Chicago.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it may never make the final book, like that stuff comes out, but it allows me to jump on Google and say, hey, what was the weather like in Chicago on this particular date?
I would never be that accurate. Never.
What time did this go?
The new Goosebumps book is called Night of the Squawker, and it's about birds. And the editor said, well, that bird wouldn't have migrated to New Hampshire that early in the year. And I thought, wait, what? I've made it up. I'm just making it up. Don't tell me when the bird migrated. I'm lucky, JD. I don't have to be that accurate.
I get shell shocked. I get emails from people, the sun didn't set in Chicago on that day until 6:32.
Oh, come on.
It's not dark. People love to find that kind of stuff.
I think half of them used to argue it's a speculative premise. Calm down.
That is horrible.
Jeffrey Deeper was actually my very first one like that, because I wrote that a 38 had a safety, and he was the first person to call me out on something silly like that, like 38s don't have a safety.
Oh man, a gun person.
How much Looking into, well, thinking about the research involved in that, obviously, if you don't do a lot of research into the guns, it's easy to get that kind of stuff wrong. But for both of you guys, do you do a lot of planning for stories as well, or are you both what they would call a pantser, just kind of sit down
No,
and get it out?
I outline every book. I outline, everybody hates to outline. I can't work without it. I do a 20-page outline for a 120-page Goosebumps book. And
Wow.
it's chapter 1. This is what happens. I put dialogue in the outline, and I have the chapter ending, which is very important. In Goosebumps, every chapter has to end with a cliffhanger. And chapter 2, this happens. So when I sit down to write the book, I know everything that's going to happen in the book. I have it, kids always say, kids, what do you do about writer's block? I said, you can't have writer's block if you do this much planning, because you know the middle, you know the ending, you know where you're going. There's no way you can have writer's block. And
like you're just
I do this on every short story I write. I do an outline first.
So you're just connecting the dots, so to speak, on the way through to finish the
I can
thing.
enjoy the writing. I can relax. I've done the thinking. I've done the hard part. It's all there, and I can just enjoy what I'm doing and enjoy the writing.
And JD, how about you?
I've done the full gambit of this. So I started off as basically what you call a pantser. I had my basic premise. I knew where my story was going, and usually something that would happen in the middle, but then I just hit the ground running and just went with it. I did that with my first couple of books, and then I got a phone call from James Patterson, and he wanted to write something together. We ended up having lunch and brainstormed some ideas. But he's a notorious outliner. Like he's, very similar to what Bob mentioned. He's got 30 to 60 pages before he starts that book. So we kind of walked away from that discussion thinking we wouldn't be able to work with each other. And then we decided, well, let's try one without an outline. I'm the only guy to ever get James Patterson to write a book without an outline. So we basically went back and forth. I would write
do that.
Well,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I would write a chapter and basically paint him into a corner, and I would think, I've got him. There's no way he's going to get out of this. And 15 minutes later, he'd send me the next chapter, and not only did he get out of it, but he put me in an even worse position. And we just kept going back and forth like that. And we finished the book, and it came out great. But then he said, you know what? Now let's try one my way, and he handed me an outline. And it was the first time I had worked with one. And it was just like Bob said, you've got, everything is just so perfectly laid out. You know exactly where you're going. There's very few wasted words. And you get to that finish line, and it's a tighter story, for it. So now I outline everything at this point. To me, it's the better way to do it if you want to be efficient, if you're plan to do a lot of this.
Yeah, especially if you plan to do a lot of books, it's much faster than having to think about it as you write it.
Well, something as simple as, you make a change to the story. You have a character that's not working. If you're just pantsing the novel and writing, to take a character out, that might mean going back and taking 15,000 words out. If it's an outline, it takes you 10 minutes. You just go through the outline, you plug that character out, and you change it to something else, and you move on. Right. It's so much easier, and you just get a tighter, more intricate story in the end, by the time you sit down to write it.
Yeah, so it becomes a lot less easy to write yourself into a corner as well when you're talking kind of thrillers and mystery with lots of moving parts.
Yeah,
you get it easier with an outline.
Yep.
Perfect. And I was just realized still up on screen here. I was just when we were talking about filler words, kind of highlighting some of the stuff that shows up in this one. I know you said just is a huge one for you. I always find that tends to be the number one, just kind of sentence filler that always has to go. I have a major problem with that, and I just have to kind of reconcile with myself that I do enjoy it for measure in some sentences. I'd like to have it there in this kind of literary beat, but otherwise I've got to really argue with myself and go through and just say, yeah, it's not necessary. And we can see a lot of it starts to kind of glue up or stick together this part as well, which I think is it's our slow kind of opening. So some of these words getting stripped out can help to make things more economic. But speaking kind of economy, what is your guys' view on dialogue? Because one thing we can look at too in here, and I don't know if you use that very often, JD, but overuse of dialogue tags. I think it was actually quite a prevalent little piece of advice. Not so much in the past decade. I would see a lot of writing tutors and things on YouTube saying, "Oh, don't use said and asked; they're boring. You want to be going for all of the really varied tags like exclaimed or cried and all of these other things." What do you guys think about dialogue? I suppose I'll let you go first, Bob.
It's different for kids. I have to be, the books are mostly dialogue, and the kids have to know who's talking.
Sure.
And I use them all the time. And I do said and asked, and I don't do very many others. It makes it cleaner. I don't do, declared or exclaimed, anything like that. I have to make the story really easy to read and really clear to kids who's talking. So that rule doesn't really apply to me.
Good, yeah, because I think using too many of the weird ones is not a good idea. I think it makes things a lot less clear.
Well,
I can actually run through here.
It looks like showing off.
Yes, yep, true.
To me, there's nothing wrong with the word said.
Do you believe that as well, JD?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the word said kind of vanishes. Your brain doesn't even see it. Unlike the other ones that do jump out at you. And I think if the word jumps out at you, it takes the reader out of the story, and that's the opposite of what you want to do. I tend to just write when I do my first draft. I just kind of stick to said or whatever. I put those kind of things in there. But on my second draft, I try to take out as many of them as possible. I'm a huge Thomas Harris fan, and one of my favorite things about reading his books is you can strip out everything and just look at the dialogue, and you know exactly who is saying what in his book. If you take everything else away, his dialogue is so crisp and so unique to each individual, you can tell who it is. So when I do my second draft, I look at each sentence, and if there's a tag on there, I try to eliminate the tag if I can. If I can't, I look at the text for the dialogue itself, and how can I tighten this up? How can I make this unique for this character so the reader knows who it is without having to have all this extra baggage?
Awesome, yeah, perfect. I think I've just popped to an example here. How would you think of working with this one? Because I very much subscribe to the same belief there when it comes to dialogue. Is rather than having to use this tag, how can I just make it clear in the narrative that this is how it's likely being said? But we have here, for example, I don't need to be saved all the time. She grumbled through her teeth. Again, I think quite a busy sentence happening here too, with a lot of commas pulling together all this info.
Grumbling and clutching. You've got a lot going on in that sentence. Grumbling, clutching, checking, fumbling. That's a lot for one sentence.
And it's all unnecessary. None of it needs to be there if you get that dialogue right.
Yeah.
So that would be my focus. I would try to strip out almost everything there other than that dialogue and make sure what she's saying communicates the rest of what the author is trying to tell us.
How do you grumble through your teeth?
Well, that's a good question.
Clutching your side.
Yeah, you have to clutch your side.
That is hard.
I mean, a lot of authors, I think, could benefit from actually what Bob kind of just pointed out. Stand up and try to actually do that. It's not physically possible. One of the ways that I teach people,
you don't have to stand up to grumble through your teeth, but come on.
One of the ways that I teach people to write dialogue is I tell them to go to a coffee shop and sit down and eavesdrop on the table next to you with your laptop open and type out whatever it is they're saying. A real conversation, put it down on paper. And you're going to find that people speak in a lot of clipped sentences. A lot of the grammar is bad. But when you do that, when you go through that exercise and you actually see what a real conversation looks like on paper, and you do that enough, it'll condition your writing in order to get to the point where you can write it. The flip side of that is most programs today will actually read your dialogue to you. So if you're writing a Microsoft Word, you can click on a button and it'll read it to you. Authors should do that. Listen to it out loud and see what it really sounds like. Does it sound like real people talking? If not, then you need to make some changes.
It also helps to read authors who are really good with dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love Robert B. Parker, who wrote the Spencer novels. His dialogue is amazing, and the whole style is amazing, because you'll have dialogue, and then one paragraph of description, then dialogue. It's an amazing, clear, concise style. I always try to copy that. Yeah,
I mean, you learn so much from reading. Like I grew up without a TV in the house. We were hitting the library when I was like 3-4 years old and on. And so I learned this process through reading. But I've got the new Dennis Lehane book sitting over here, and I read it once as a fan, and now I'm going through it with a highlighter and doing little things like, Dennis Lehane is fantastic at introducing a character in like one sentence. He can describe somebody and you know exactly who that person is. So I hit books like that with a highlighter. When the author does something like that, I highlight it, I look at it, I try to figure out how they did it so that I can replicate it, in my own writing. You're constantly learning in this business.
Yeah, I always recommend I do that with little sticky note things as well for marking kind of where a hook has been planted and where it's going to come back again, and things just to gauge distance and deployment and things like that are really, really helpful for structural breakdowns of what's going on there. And I think as well, not so much, well, it's made for TV and everything, but I highly recommend checking out the screenplays of Aaron Sorkin. I think he's a phenomenal dialogue writer for TV, but even just reading his scripts, you can see so much packed into every single line that everything is meaningful. There's no fluff.
Yeah, scripts are a very good source of that. And you can get almost all of them now on the internet. It's
Perfect. So yes, looking at this one, I was thinking, yeah, all of this just is extremely busy. I think part of the problem here, actually, looking at the sentence as a whole, is because of all the commas, everything seems to be happening simultaneously, which I don't think it's intended to be. You got then fumbling towards the door, like she's done all this and then moved, but it doesn't feel that way because it's all packed together.
It should be at least 4 sentences.
I'm sure we have a few various different things going on here. Well, we got sobbed is just it's kind of there. And continued is always a good one. And people love hissed. The voice repeated, dull and slightly hissed.
People are always hissing, even when there's no S's or anything. When they couldn't be hissing. That's the real sign of someone who doesn't know what they're doing. When you see somebody hissing and they couldn't be hissing.
And to catch those, there was one topic that I wanted to talk to you guys about as well. You mentioned in the strong writing, JD, there's showing versus telling, which I think in this really helps to pick up on experiential words or the concept of filtering that always gets in the way. I've been talking a lot about that lately, but I figure it's a really good concept to kind of talk with people about when it comes to suspense and thrillers and horror and all these things that are supposed to be very involving. If we look for words that are sort of experiential here, we've got felt, hear, smell is another one, observed, taste. So if we look for these, we're really looking for where the author's just telling us that the character could hear. I wonder if there's a current one that we can kind of pick up here. Now she could smell it. He saw, he felt, she saw, she heard. What do you feel about that? Is that something that you have spent a lot of time to fix in your own writing in the past, or do you not really think about it today?
Early on, for sure. I see this in every early draft I pick up from other authors when they're first starting out. And it's human nature if you think about it, because if you tell a story to somebody, in real life, you're telling us, your buddy something that happened to you yesterday. You're telling them something that happened to you yesterday. It's in the past. So you use a lot of these words in telling of that story. But the difference there is when you're telling a story in fiction, you basically have to feel as if you're in the moment. Which flips that on its head. It didn't happen yesterday, it's happening right now.
Sure.
So that's the simplest way I think to actually look at that. I mean, 99.9% of these kind of words can come out if you just change the sentence around a little bit and find a better way to explain it, to bring it into the now rather than the past.
And how about you, Bob? Is that something? How does that work in the lower?
Yes, they slow things down. When I'm writing, a book for kids, it has to be, all that matters is what happens next. You just have to keep going. You can't let these things slow you down, because that's all the kids care about. What happens next? What happens next? They're totally plot driven. So you don't want to bog them down in words like that.
Just keep it clean, keep it moving.
Yes.
I can see here one example I just found there of the felt. He felt his neck sting, throb, then freeze. And it really becomes just a lot more involving and immediate. It was just his neck stung, or whatever way you rephrase that entirely. But you just want to make it right there in the moment. Stop distancing from it. And anything else in terms of clean writing you would recommend? Something from your own past that you've really had to master that we haven't talked about?
I mean, well, AutoCrit is just part of my process. There's a lot of human interaction too. So for me, like I typically write the first draft, then I run it through AutoCrit to weed out this kind of stuff. Then I hand it to my wife, who on the initial book was not like Bob's wife. Like she basically handed it back, gave me the attaboy pat on the back, and tried to walk away. And I was like, no, I really need to know what's wrong here. Like I need you to be honest with me. And she's like, are you sure? And she took the book back, and when I got it back, like it was just this pile of messy pages, all red line and highlighter, Post-it notes everywhere. I took it in my office, and I think I cried for like a week. But she was brutally honest, and like you need that in order to get to the next level. So I always go through that step, as painful as it is. Then I bring the book back, and I write my second draft, basically cleaning it up with everything that she gave me. And then I send the book out to beta readers. I've got 6 different people that typically read all of my books. They're extremely critical. One of them gave me my very first 1-star review on Amazon. So I emailed her and I was like, well, tell you what, I'll let you read my next book if you give me this kind of feedback and you take your review down. So she's been one of my beta readers from the start. But they go through, and one of the things that I tell them to do, and I think this is really important, I give them a printed copy of the book instead of an electronic version. And I make them mark any place that they're skimming with a highlighter. So if they find themselves skipping over paragraphs, I want to know where that is, and they mark it with a highlighter. The second thing I always tell them is to, anytime you close the book, I need to know where you do that. I don't care if you have to make dinner, you've got to pick up the kids, or whatever your reason is. I want to know where you felt it was okay to put that book down, until the next time you could read it. So when I get that kind of information back, I try to weed out those sections. So if I notice that 2 or 3 of the beta readers skimmed the same sections, those sections have to go. If everybody's closing the book at this particular chapter break, what can I do to make them turn that page instead? And that's more towards, writing thrillers, but that it helps, quite a bit. After I do that, I do another rewrite, and then it goes to a personal copy editor who goes through and just fixes any grammatical stuff that I have left. And after that, I send it off to my agent. So that's the first time an agent or a real editor actually see it, but it goes through all of those steps first. Nothing comes out of off the typewriter perfect. I don't think anybody's ever figured out how to do that.
And are you
you do actual research? I never heard of anybody doing test marketing of a book first. Usually the test marketing of a book is they publish the book and they put it on the shelf. That's the test marketing. That's amazing. Nowadays
amazing. We have Google, so at least we can Google something. We don't have to go there. Dan Brown lives right down the street from me, and he seems to visit every single place that he writes about. The guy is never home. But
that's nice. That's nice. Here's my all-time best Amazon review. Speaking of Amazon, this is my favorite review. 5 stars. The packaging was good and it was very easy to open.
Perfect.
It's good, right? It's a good review.
Yeah, I've seen 1-star reviews as well from a lot of, like movies or books or whatever arrived and the packaging was destroyed. It's like, well, thank you for that 1-star review of my work. Excellent.
Well, my friend Harlan Coben got an Amazon review of 1 star, and it said 1 star, I never ordered this book.
So do you find, with all your processes that you go through getting so much feedback, JD, is it kind of second nature to you to go on a darling slaughterfest? Do you find yourself often trying to cling to sections that people said, like, this is where I fell off, or do you just go hell for leather removing?
No, I mean, at this point, at some point you have to realize you're creating a product. It's a widget that's going to have to sell to other people. And there's a lot of people involved in that process, not only your editor, but, the marketing people at the publisher, and a lot of them weigh in on this type of stuff too. You have to take all that feedback, because the second you stand on a soapbox and try to save something, just for the sake of saving it, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. You're shooting yourself in the foot. The only time I've ever really pushed back on anything, is if there's something in the story that I feel should stay there for now, meaning that sometimes my agent may not like something, or my film agent may not like something. I prefer to leave those things in there. And then, when it gets to the point where an actual editor has paid for the book, if they tell me to take it out, then that's a very different conversation because they just wrote a check for it. But, beta readers, my wife, my agent, those types of people, I listen to what they have to say. But, it has to make sense. So you have to weigh those things. I mean, I've got one right now that just sold for film. The book we haven't signed with a publisher yet. We ended up getting a film deal before that even happened. And we left in all the stuff that my agent wanted to take out. And on the film side, those are some of their favorite parts, so
awesome.
what happens if you take that out, So I would much rather whoever is buying it, whoever's, stroking that check, it's their decision. And if they tell me to take something out and they've got a good reason, then it can go.
And Bob, how about you? Much resistance on your side from changes recommended by your wife, or are you fairly relaxed?
Well, I have
with
a
it?
lot of editors, and I hate to revise. I find it really hard to get the same energy for revising as for writing. But luckily, I have these editors are really good, and here's the problem: they're always right. They're always right. And speaking, my wife is an editor. She's always right. I've never won a bet. We've been married for years and years. I've never won a bet. She's always right. So I listen to these editors.
You learn to suck it up,
Yeah.
make the changes.
Yeah, right.
But I was thinking as well, what you said there, JD, about the movie adaptation, and obviously those scenes being much more suited for film, becoming the favorites. Do you tend to write your stories with a cinematic mind, if you know what I mean? Are you trying to structure like a movie, or what do you see as the big difference? Like if you don't, if you don't think of it that way.
I've been very lucky with that. I've got a whole bunch of them that have been optioned at this point. And I think when I'm writing, when it's working at its best, I see the story playing out in my head as if I'm watching a movie and I'm just sitting there writing down what's happening. And those types of scenes seem to be the ones that resonate with those particular people. So I think what I write, for better or worse, and I can't explain why it happens, just turns out to be cinematic. I guess I'm just lucky with that.
Perfect. Bob, how about you?
Well, I'm been writing comic books now, so it forces you to be very visual. I don't think that visually when I'm writing Goosebumps or a thriller, but comic books, you have to think of the art panel by panel, and you have to kind of picture it as you go.
Yeah.
My new graphic novel, I just did a graphic novel for adults, horror novel for adults called Stuff of Nightmares. And this was a very different experience for me. It was actually a lot of fun. And it had to be very visual, of course.
Yeah, you end up having to think. It's almost like with a graphic novel or comic, it's almost like you're directing the movie with storyboards as you're kind of writing the descriptions.
At the same time, it's easier than writing a novel because I'm not good at description. I mean, I don't know different trees and I don't know flowers. I don't know any of that stuff. But when you're writing a comic book, you say he's walking through the jungle. And then the artist has to design the jungle. I don't have to know anything. I love that.
And well, I guess it's a bit easier because a lot of the problems that you can find in writing too, and I can run a quick thing here for our generic descriptions, is writing good descriptions that kind of make people get involved in the story without going overboard or without stripping it too far back. Do you think, as you said there, but just not really liking or getting into all that detail, do you just keep your descriptions more sparse?
Yeah, believe me, they're very sparse.
JD, are you the opposite?
My Goosebumps editor had a really good line. She said, I create full-blown cardboard characters. That's really good, right? And true.
I'm going to point out something that I think a lot of people don't realize. So the more descriptive you are in your text, a lot of times that can actually hurt you because the human mind is very good at conjuring up images. So the second you tell somebody what a character looks like, if that image that you're telling them is different from the image that they have in their head, it's going to take that reader out of the story. So one of the things that I've learned is by providing less description, the reader's brain actually fills in a lot of those blanks. And some of the best reviews I've got where they've said that I have, fantastic descriptions, or this scene, reminds me, of this particular place, or you described it so perfectly, or this person, or whatever. Those are the ones where I gave the least amount of descriptive data. The ones where I try to force it down their throat by saying this character looked exactly like this and was wearing this. Those are the ones that don't work. And I think Stephen King actually talks about that in On Writing, like the less is more when it comes to a lot of that stuff. So you have to find that perfect, perfect ground. There's nothing that frustrates me more than, reading a book, and the second a character is introduced, they immediately tell you how old they are. They tell you their hair color. They tell you what they're wearing. Like they have these descriptive, it's like a tick box, just they're going down a checklist for every single character. Like all I care about is the conversation happening between these two characters. So I cut a lot of that stuff usually on the second pass if I find it in my own books or other ones that I'm editing.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think I will take the AutoCrit off the screen here for now, everybody. But yes, I hope that's been, as per your use as well, JD. We've dug through a few things here. It's been a kind of visually stimulating and some interesting things to work on here for this author with the sample. Thank you both very much for your feedback and insights into what we have here. But yeah, we very much only touch the surface of what AutoCrit can do for you in terms of helping to get all these editorial bits in order. But let me close that off.
Well, let me give you a little PSA as somebody who has used AutoCrit for a very long time. So any new writer that is trying to get in front of an editor, try and get in front of an agent, there's zero harm. Take your book, put it in AutoCrit, click through every single one of those tabs because we're all different. So click through all of them, figure out where your weaknesses are because the program will tell you. And once the program points those things out, then you can use it to actually develop that and get better at it and clean it up and fix it. So like the sections that we just looked at were the ones that I had to focus on, but that could be very different than what Bob would have to look at, different than what you would have to look at. But it doesn't take much to, just upload your book in there and just run through all of them and figure out where your problem areas are. And trust me, if you weed them out and, before that book gets to an editor, you've got a lot better chance of actually selling it. And you got a lot better chance of getting a bigger payday for it because it's a cleaner book.
Wonderful. Any last words from you as well, Bob? Well, I guess for anyone, whatever point in the career.
Interesting to me. I didn't know anything about AutoCrit, and I think it sounds like a really good tool, especially for people who don't have an editor and are getting started with this. It sounds like it would really help a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot of people as well who are planning to just kind of fast track down the self-publishing route as well. Not that I would ever say it's okay to skip having an editor, but some people still they think they might just do it themselves. Don't do it entirely yourself. I'll tell you that much. But yes, thank you both. I wanted to just give a minute or two in the end here for Jeff, if Jeff is around there, to spread a few words about Thrillerfest. I have to say once again, the help make this whole session happen, and whom we are sponsoring this year. Let me add you in here if I can spotlight you, Jeff.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. This has been an amazing session, and I used AutoCrit myself, and I actually have a book coming out early next year, so I'm very excited about that. And so Thrillerfest, AutoCrit is a wonderful sponsor, and basically we're in New York, and you can see the dates behind me. And we are celebrating the world of thrillers with some amazing people. And our spotlight guests this year are Jack Carr and Oinken Braithwaite. Our thriller masters are Charlene Harris and Walter Mosley. And our Silver Bullet Award recipient is Michael Conley. And I actually get the privilege of getting to interview him on Saturday, the 3rd there. So super excited about our entire program. Come on by or go to thrillerfest.com and take a look and see the type of things that we offer.
Superb. And yes, as I mentioned in the beginning too, if you are going to make it there, we would love to see you. Feel free to drop by. Myself and Kevin will be there. Last year was a lot of fun. So hopefully a lot of fun this year too. And you'll be able to book a demo session or just drop into the room. If you want to bring your own manuscript with you on a pen drive or anything like that, we can hook it up, run it through and give you a demo. But like I did mention earlier as well, we are currently running as kind of celebration for the sponsorship, a lifetime membership option. So if you want to pick that up, it's autocrit.com/thrillerfest. I'm sure Kevin or Daniel has dropped it in the chat there again. But that's going to be running for a little bit. Make sure to check that out. And yeah, we'd love to see you as members, and hopefully make all the use of the tool that you can. Every in and out and up and down. It's rather incredible. But do we have any final comments or anything from the chat we need to address, Kevin?
Oh, I think we're all set, Gareth. We also want to mention too that AutoCrit's going to have a short story writing challenge. You want to throw that up for a second, Gareth? We're going to have a short story writing challenge coming this actually next month.
We will
actually
starting next week.
Next week. I'm sorry, not next month. Next week. The time is just flying by right now. So yes, anybody that's out there that wants to participate in a short story writing challenge with us, by all means, it's free to enter. Just we'd love to see you. Just put your work out there. So
awesome.
I think.
And yeah, we will be doing a live stream to announce that next week. It'll be the same time slot next Tuesday. So if you want to, since this is on YouTube, I can actually do this pointing down thing and say like and subscribe and ring the bell and what is it they say? Smash that subscribe button, and you'll see us live next week for the launch of the writing challenge. There's kind of rules and things and prizes, all sorts. Totally free to take part. It's just for fun, but you walk away with something nice at the end, and hopefully a story to sell. You know, get it out there, get in an anthology somewhere, and kick off your career. Is what it's all about. So again, thank you, gentlemen, both from the bottom of our hearts. And I think we'll jump off now. But thanks everybody for coming. Take care. Make sure to grab your lifetime membership. And we'll see you around. We'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.